The manila folder felt heavy in my hands as I stood in the doorway of Harborview Restaurant, watching Brandon laugh with Vanessa across the candlelit table. They hadn't seen me yet. His hand covered hers, his thumb tracing circles on her skin in a gesture I remembered from our early dating years. The champagne bottle between them was nearly empty, celebration evident in their relaxed postures and bright smiles. I walked forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Brandon's eyes found mine first. The color drained from his face before he quickly composed himself into that smooth expression he wore during difficult client meetings. Vanessa turned, her smile freezing into something polite and uncertain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I reached their table and set the folder down between the champagne flutes and half-eaten appetizers. The sound it made was soft, almost gentle, contradicting the earthquake about to happen. Congratulations on your fresh start, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I thought you might want to see what 18 years really cost you. Brandon's hand moved toward the folder, then hesitated. What is this, Nicole? Another one of your dramatic scenes? Just open it, I replied, pulling out the chair across from them and sitting down uninvited. The waiter started to approach but read the tension and retreated. I want to see your face when you realize what you've actually done. His fingers, those same fingers that had signed our marriage certificate, slid the folder open. I watched his expression shift as he processed the first document. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then something approaching fear. Vanessa leaned in to look, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. This can't be real, Brandon whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. The forensic accountant was very thorough, I said. Every transaction, every shell company, every fraudulent report. It's all documented. The federal investigators have been quite interested in your creative bookkeeping at Summit Financial. Brandon's eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time in our 18 years together, I saw genuine panic replace his usual composed arrogance. You wouldn't dare. I already have, I said simply. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you how we got here. 3 months earlier, I wouldn't have believed my life could unravel so completely in a single afternoon. It was a Thursday, unremarkable in every way except for what it would come to mean. I had taken the afternoon off from my position at Riverside Community Foundation to handle some overdue organization at home. Brandon was supposed to be in Seattle for a 3-day conference with his partners from Summit Financial Group. The kids were at their various activities. Ethan had debate practice, Sophie was at soccer, and Lily had her art class. The house on Maple Ridge Drive sat quiet around me, filled with afternoon sunlight and the potential for productivity. I had been putting off sorting through our home office for months. Brandon's files mixed with mine, financial documents scattered across surfaces, old tax returns stuffed into drawers without any logical system. As the family's unofficial administrator, I handled most of our household paperwork, but Brandon's business documents were his domain. He'd always been particular about his work files, dismissive when I offered to help organize them. The filing cabinet in his office was unlocked, which should have been my first clue that something was off. Brandon was meticulous about security, always locking away anything related to Summit Financial. I pulled open the top drawer, expecting to find the usual assortment of client portfolios and investment reports. Instead, I found a leather portfolio I'd never seen before, tucked behind hanging files like someone had tried to hide it but hadn't quite succeeded. Inside were bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize. The names were familiar though, variations on our address, our children's names, businesses that sounded legitimate but that I'd never heard Brandon mention. Cascade Investment Holdings, Maple Ridge Ventures, Harper Family Trust. Each statement showed deposits in amounts that made my hands shake. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, sometimes over 100,000 in a single transaction. I sat down in Brandon's expensive leather chair, the one he'd insisted on buying last year for $3,000 because proper lumbar support was essential for productivity. The statements went back 4 years. I started calculating in my head, my background in nonprofit financial management kicking in despite my growing dread. Conservative estimate, looking at just the documents in front of me, there was close to $2 million moving through these accounts that I knew nothing about. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. The screen showed a photo of him and his business partner David Foster standing in front of a conference center, both men in suits, drinks in hand. Seattle conference going great, the message read. Miss you. Be home Saturday afternoon. I looked at the date on the most recent bank statement. It was from 2 days ago. A deposit of $85,000 into the Cascade Investment Holdings account, with a notation that read Client Disbursement Summit Financial. The thing about discovering betrayal is that your brain tries to protect you at first. It offers innocent explanations, logical reasons why what you're seeing isn't what you think. Maybe these were legitimate business accounts. Maybe Brandon had mentioned them and I'd forgotten. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why my husband of 18 years had hidden accounts containing millions of dollars that our family had never benefited from. But I'd worked in nonprofit finance for 12 years before taking my current role at the foundation. I knew what money laundering looked like. I knew what embezzlement patterns resembled. And these statements, with their careful notations and strategic amounts just under the federal reporting threshold, looked exactly like what they were. Financial crimes. I photographed every page with my phone, my hand surprisingly steady once I'd made the decision to document everything. Years of managing donor funds and grant applications had taught me that documentation was everything. Whatever this was, whatever Brandon had done, I needed proof before confronting him. I carefully returned the portfolio to its hiding place, arranged exactly as I'd found it, and closed the filing cabinet. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car door closing in our driveway. I moved to the window and felt my stomach drop. Brandon's black Mercedes sat in the driveway, and he was walking toward the house with his briefcase, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He wasn't supposed to be home for 2 more days. I left his office quickly, closing the door behind me, and was in the kitchen pretending to sort mail when he walked in. His smile was warm, familiar, the smile of a man coming home to his wife after a day at work. "You're home early," I said, keeping my voice light even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "I thought the conference went through Saturday." "Change of plans," he replied, loosening his tie as he set his briefcase on the counter. "David had a family emergency, so we wrapped early. I thought I'd surprise you." He crossed the kitchen and kissed my forehead, the gesture so automatic, so practiced, that I wondered how long he'd been performing our marriage while living some other life I knew nothing about. "That's nice," I managed. "Are you hungry? I can make something." "Actually, I need to shower and change. I have to head back to the office for a few hours. Client emergency." He was already walking toward the stairs, pulling out his phone. "Don't wait up. This might take a while." I watched him disappear up the staircase, listened to his footsteps overhead as he moved through our bedroom. The shower turned on. My phone felt hot in my pocket, filled with photographs of evidence I didn't fully understand yet. I should have felt afraid or confused, but what I felt was a strange, cold clarity. Something was deeply wrong, and Brandon's unexpected return, his casual lies about Seattle, his immediate need to leave again, it all fit a pattern I was only beginning to recognize. He was back downstairs in 20 minutes, dressed in casual clothes, his hair still damp. "I'll probably be late," he said, grabbing his keys. "Maybe crash at David's if it goes too long. You know how these things are." "Sure," I said. "I know exactly how these things are." If he caught the edge in my voice, he didn't show it. He kissed me again, this time on the cheek, and was gone. I waited until his car pulled away before I allowed myself to move. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos I'd taken. All those accounts. All that money. All those years of Brandon being the dedicated provider, the successful investment manager, the man who built Summit Financial Group from a small firm into one of the most respected names in Riverside Hills. I called my sister Margaret. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. "Hey Nick, what's up? Everything okay? I need you to recommend a lawyer, I said. A really good one. The kind who handles complicated divorces. There was a pause. Margaret knew me well enough to know I didn't make dramatic statements lightly. What happened? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But I think Brandon's been stealing money. A lot of money. And I don't think he's been in Seattle this week. Another pause, longer this time. I'm calling Patricia Dawson right now. She handled the Carter divorce last year. She's tough, discreet, and she doesn't lose. Can you meet tomorrow? Yes, I said. But Margaret, don't tell anyone. Not yet. I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and tried to remember the last time Brandon and I had really talked. Not about logistics or schedules or the kids' activities, but actually talked. About dreams, feelings, the future we were supposedly building together. I couldn't remember. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Somewhere in the past few years, we become business partners managing a household rather than a married couple building a life. The front door opened and Lily burst in, her blonde hair wild from art class, her hands stained with paint. Mom, look what I made. She held up a canvas covered in swirls of blue and green. It's the ocean, but from a fish's perspective. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, pulling her into a hug and breathing in the smell of acrylic paint and strawberry shampoo. You're so talented. Where's Dad? She asked. His car was here when Mrs. Peterson dropped me off. He had to go back to work, I said. But he'll see your painting later. Why don't you wash up for dinner? As Lily ran upstairs, I looked around our home. The custom kitchen with its marble countertops that Brandon had insisted we needed. The original hardwood floors we'd restored. The windows overlooking our landscaped backyard with its pool and covered patio. All of it purchased with money from Brandon's successful career at Summit Financial. Money that now seemed questionable at best, stolen at worst. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat alone in our living room with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking and my laptop open to a search engine. I typed in financial crimes investment firms and started reading. The patterns I found matched what I'd seen in those bank statements. Small amounts to avoid detection. Multiple accounts to spread the risk. Shell companies to disguise the flow. It was textbook embezzlement. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Still at the office. Definitely staying at David's tonight. Love you. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new browser window and searched for Patricia Dawson, attorney at law. Her website showed a professional woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an impressive track record. Her specialties included high-asset divorce, financial fraud, and complex litigation. Margaret had chosen well. I sent an email requesting a consultation, marking it urgent. Then I went upstairs to our bedroom, the room I'd shared with Brandon for nearly 2 decades, and tried to remember who I'd been before I became Mrs. Harper. Before I'd organized my life around supporting Brandon's career and raising our children. Before I'd become so comfortable in my role that I'd stopped questioning anything. The woman I'd been at 20 when Brandon and I met had been ambitious, driven, planning a career in financial management with dreams of maybe running her own firm someday. I'd put those dreams on hold when Ethan was born, then pushed them further back with each subsequent child. It seemed practical at the time. Brandon's career was taking off. Someone needed to be home for the kids. We could afford for me to step back. I'd return to my career later, when the kids were older. Later had turned into never. My position at Riverside Community Foundation was part-time, flexible, more volunteer work than career. It paid enough to cover my personal expenses and gave me something to do beyond household management, but it wasn't the future I'd once imagined. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Nicole Jennings, ambitious graduate with a finance degree, and become just Nicole Harper, Brandon's wife, the kids' mom, the woman who organized charity events and baked cookies for school functions. Looking at our bedroom now, I saw it differently. The king-sized bed with its expensive linens. The matching nightstands, Brandon's always neat, mine cluttered with books and the kids' school papers. His walk-in closet with rows of tailored suits. My smaller closet with its practical clothes, nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention away from Brandon at company events. Even our bedroom reflected the dynamic of our marriage. His space, his comfort, his life, with me fitted carefully into the margins. My phone lit up with Patricia Dawson's response. Miss Harper, I have an opening tomorrow at 9 a.m. Based on your email, I've blocked 2 hours. Please bring any relevant financial documents you can access safely. This will be confidential. I confirmed the appointment and finally let myself cry. Not for the marriage that was ending, I could feel that ending settling over me like a cold but clarifying wind, but for the years I'd spent building a life that turned out to be constructed on lies. For the trust I'd given so freely. For the version of myself I'd abandoned to become the perfect wife for a man who'd been deceiving me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. Tonight, I let myself grieve what I'd lost and what I'd given away. By the time I fell asleep, my tears had dried and something harder had taken their place. Brandon had made the mistake of underestimating me. He'd seen the accommodating wife, the devoted mother, the woman who managed the household and never asked difficult questions. He'd forgotten, or maybe never really known, that beneath that role was someone who understood money, who could read financial statements, who had built a career before she'd set it aside for him. He was about to remember. And by the time I was done, he would wish he'd never forgotten. The next morning, I dropped the kids at school with the usual reminders about homework and pickup times, smiling at the other parents, waving to teachers, maintaining the facade of normal. Inside, I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, performing the role of Nicole Harper while someone else, someone sharper and more calculating, was taking control. Patricia Dawson's office was in a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel and expensive art in the lobby. Her receptionist led me to a corner office with windows overlooking Metro Bay. Patricia herself was exactly as her website suggested, professional and direct, with eyes that seemed to assess and categorize in seconds. "Tell me everything," she said after we'd gone through the preliminary introductions. "Don't leave anything out, even if it seems minor." I walked her through discovering the statements, Brandon's unexpected return and immediate departure, the patterns I'd recognized in the account activity. I showed her the photos on my phone. She studied each one carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Harper, what you found suggests your husband is involved in significant financial crimes. Potentially embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. This goes beyond a divorce case. We're talking federal charges." My stomach dropped despite having suspected as much. "What do I do?" "First, we secure your position and protect you and your children from any legal fallout. Then we document everything thoroughly before confronting him or his attorneys. If Brandon realizes you know, he'll move quickly to hide evidence and protect himself. We need to be faster and smarter." She leaned forward. "Are you prepared for what this means? The investigation, the publicity, watching your husband potentially face criminal charges?" I thought about the life we'd built, the illusion of security and success. I thought about my children discovering their father was a criminal. I thought about the families who'd trusted Summit Financial with their retirement funds, their children's college savings, their futures. If Brandon had been stealing from the firm, he'd been stealing from them. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." "What's the first step?" Patricia gave me my first assignment that same afternoon. "We need a complete financial picture," she explained. "Access everything you can legally reach. Joint bank accounts, credit card statements, tax returns, property deeds. Make copies of everything. Be systematic and careful. If Brandon notices anything missing or disturbed, he'll know you're investigating." I spent the next week transforming into someone I barely recognized. During the day, I maintained my routine with precision. I took Lily to her art classes, cheered at Sophie's soccer games, helped Ethan prepare for his debate tournament. I attended my regular shifts at Riverside Community Foundation, processing donation receipts and coordinating volunteer schedules. I smiled at neighbors, exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store, responded to Brandon's texts with casual warmth. Everything appeared perfectly normal. But at night, after the house settled into silence, I became someone else entirely. I photographed documents in Brandon's office, careful to return everything to its exact position. I created a cloud storage account under a name Brandon would never connect to me and uploaded every piece of evidence. I tracked his movements through the Find My Phone feature we'd set up years ago for family safety, noting every location, every deviation from his stated schedule. The patterns emerged quickly. The Seattle conference had been a fabrication. Brandon's phone showed he'd been at a property in Metro Bay that entire week, an address I didn't recognize. When I cross-referenced it with property records, I found it registered to Cascade Investment Holdings. One of his shell companies owned real estate. I drove past it one afternoon, a modern townhouse in an expensive neighborhood, definitely not a business property. Through our shared credit card statements, I found regular charges to Belmont Country Club on Thursday evenings. Brandon had told me those were client dinner meetings. But when I called the club pretending to confirm a reservation, the host mentioned that Mr. Harper's usual table for two was available. Table for two. Not a business dinner. A regular appointment with someone. Margaret called every few days, checking on me, offering to come stay, to help with the kids, to do something. "I can see you're struggling," she said during one call. "You're so thin, Nick. You're not sleeping. Let me help." "I'm handling it," I insisted, though I'd lost 12 pounds and survived on coffee and determination. "Patricia says we need to be thorough before we make any moves. I can't fall apart yet." "Yet," Margaret repeated. "That's what worries me. You're planning when to fall apart instead of taking care of yourself now." But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Every day brought new discoveries that required documentation, new lies that needed tracking, new evidence that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the man I'd married. Brandon wasn't just embezzling from Summit Financial. He'd created an entire shadow life, complete with properties, accounts, and habits I knew nothing about. 2 weeks after my first meeting with Patricia, I found the emails. Brandon had left his laptop open in his office, something he rarely did. I'd gone in to water the plants, a normal household task that gave me an excuse to be there. The screen showed his email inbox, and at the top was a message from Vanessa Klein with the subject line "Tonight." My finger hovered over the touchpad. Reading his email crossed a line I hadn't crossed yet. Everything else had been financial documents, things I arguably had a right to see as his spouse. His emails were different, personal, private. But the subject line glowed on the screen, and I thought about all the Thursday evenings at Belmont Country Club, all the unexplained absences, all the lies. I clicked the message. The email was brief but devastating. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same time, same place. We're that thing I like. Miss you already." I scrolled through their exchange. Months of messages, dating back over a year. The contents ranged from logistical planning to explicit descriptions of their time together. Vanessa worked in commercial real estate, which explained how Brandon had acquired properties without my knowledge. She was 31, divorced, no children. In her emails, she referred to me as the situation that needed resolving and to our children as complications. The emails also revealed something else. Vanessa knew about the money. She referenced deposits, transfers, and what she called their future fund. They were planning something together, something that involved the money Brandon had been stealing in a timeline that made my hands shake as I read. 6 more months and we're clear, Brandon had written 2 weeks ago. The international accounts are established. Once I liquidate the last properties and transfer the Summit funds, we can disappear. New names, new life, just like we planned. Vanessa's response was enthusiastic. "I've already got the Costa Rica property under contract. No extradition, and your Spanish is good enough. What about the situation at home?" Brandon's reply made my blood turn cold. "Divorce papers are drafted. I'll file next month, claim irreconcilable differences, offer her a settlement that seems generous but is actually pennies compared to what we have offshore. She'll take it because she doesn't understand finance well enough to question it. By the time anyone realizes how much is missing, we'll be gone. I photographed every email, my hands trembling so badly I had to take several attempts to get clear images. When I finished, I closed the laptop and walked calmly to the bathroom, where I vomited until there was nothing left. Then I washed my face, reapplied my makeup, and went to pick up Lily from art class. That evening, Brandon came home with flowers. "Just because," he said, kissing my cheek. I wanted to remind my beautiful wife how much I appreciate everything she does. "They're lovely," I said, taking the bouquet and finding a vase. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Can't a man buy his wife flowers?" I arranged the flowers carefully, noting they were lilies, which I was allergic to. Brandon knew this. We'd had this conversation multiple times over the years. He'd bought them anyway, one more small indication of how little attention he actually paid to me, how thoroughly I'd become background scenery in his life. Over dinner, he talked about work with an ease that would have fooled me completely 2 weeks ago. A difficult client, a successful investment, plans for expanding Summit Financial. Ethan asked about the stock market, and Brandon launched into an explanation of trading strategies, playing the role of dedicated father, successful businessman, devoted husband. I watched him perform and wondered how I'd never noticed the performance before. After the kids were in bed, Brandon suggested we watch a movie together. It had been months since we'd done anything like that. I agreed, settling next to him on the couch while some action thriller played out on the screen. His arm went around my shoulders in a gesture that once would have felt comfortable, protective. Now it felt like a trap. His phone buzzed repeatedly during the movie. "Work," he said each time, silencing it without looking. But I'd seen Vanessa's name flash on the screen at least twice. When the movie ended, he claimed exhaustion and went to bed. I waited until I heard his breathing even out into sleep before I slipped downstairs and called Patricia. I told her everything I'd found. The emails, the offshore accounts, the Costa Rica property, the plan to disappear. My voice stayed steady, clinical, as if I were reporting on someone else's life instead of the dissolution of my own. Patricia was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Nicole, this changes everything. We're not just talking about divorce or even embezzlement anymore. He's planning to flee the country with stolen funds. That's a federal crime. We need to involve law enforcement immediately." "What does that mean for me?" "For the kids. It means we move faster than we planned. I'm going to contact someone I know at the Metro Bay District Attorney's Office. Agent Morris Chin specializes in financial crimes. He'll need to see everything you found." Her voice softened slightly. "I know this is overwhelming. But you've done exactly what needed to be done. You've built a case that can't be ignored." I met Agent Chin 2 days later at Patricia's office. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that reminded me of Patricia's. He listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression neutral. When I finished, he pulled out his own folder. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to share something with you that's part of an ongoing investigation. Summit Financial has been under surveillance for 8 months. We've suspected fraudulent activity, but we haven't been able to prove who's responsible or where the money's going. What you found fills in gaps we've been trying to close for almost a year." He showed me documents detailing client complaints, suspicious transactions, patterns that matched what I'd discovered in Brandon's hidden files. Summit Financial had been systematically overcharging clients, inflating management fees, and redirecting funds into accounts controlled by Brandon. The firm's other partners, including David Foster, appeared to be unaware. Brandon had access to the accounts, the authority to make transfers, and the trust of clients who believed their money was being managed ethically. "How much has he stolen?" I asked. "Based on what we've traced so far, combined with what you found, we estimate between $5 and $7 million over the past 4 years. Agent Chen's expression was grim. Most of it from retirement accounts and college funds. People who trusted him with their futures. I thought about the families I'd met at company events over the years. The Hendersons, saving for their daughter's medical school. The Martinez family, planning their retirement after 40 years of teaching. The Chas, building a nest egg for their grandchildren. Brandon had stolen from all of them while smiling at holiday parties and accepting their gratitude for his financial guidance. What happens now? I managed. Now we build a case strong enough that he can't talk his way out of it. Agent Chen leaned forward. I need access to everything you found. I also need you to keep acting normally. Don't let him know you're aware of anything. Can you do that? For how long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. We need to coordinate with federal prosecutors, secure warrants, freeze the offshore accounts before he can move the money. We get one shot at this. If he runs, we may never find him. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I perfected the art of deception, becoming what Brandon thought I was, the oblivious wife too focused on household management to notice her husband's crimes. I asked him about his day over dinner. I listened to his fabricated stories about clients and investments. I even suggested planning a vacation for the summer, watching him agree enthusiastically while knowing he planned to be in Costa Rica with Vanessa by then. At night, I lay next to him in our bed and wondered if he could hear my heart racing. Sometimes he'd reach for me in the dark, his hand finding mine, and I'd force myself not to pull away. I needed him confident, unsuspecting, convinced that his plan was working perfectly. During this time, Agent Chen worked systematically through my evidence. He brought in forensic accountants who traced every dollar through Brandon's maze of shell companies. They found connections to even more accounts, more properties, more stolen funds. The investigation expanded to include money laundering charges and conspiracy to commit fraud. Patricia focused on protecting me and the children. She filed preliminary divorce papers that would be served the same day as Brandon's arrest, ensuring I'd have legal separation and protecting our shared assets from seizure. She helped me open a new bank account in my name only and quietly transfer funds we'd need for immediate expenses. She prepared custody documents that would give me temporary full custody, citing Brandon's upcoming criminal charges. Through it all, I maintained my routine. School pickups, foundation work, grocery shopping, cooking meals. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of Mrs. Brandon Harper while Nicole Jennings, the woman I'd been before marriage, slowly re-emerged underneath. Margaret visited one afternoon, ostensibly to help with spring cleaning but really to check on me. We stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd discovered Brandon's betrayal weeks earlier, and she studied my face with concern. "You look different," she said finally. "Harder somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I'm seeing everything clearly for the first time in years." "Is that a good thing?" I considered the question. I'd lost weight I didn't need to lose. I survived on minimal sleep and constant anxiety. I was lying to my children every day, protecting them from a truth that would devastate them. But I also felt stronger than I had in years, more capable, more myself. "Ask me again when this is over," I said. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rachel Kim, a former administrative assistant at Summit Financial, contacted Agent Chen through an anonymous tip line. She'd been fired 6 months earlier for questioning discrepancies in client accounts. She had documentation, her own records of suspicious transactions, emails from Brandon ordering her to falsify reports. She'd kept everything, waiting for someone to listen. Agent Chen brought me to meet her in a coffee shop far from Riverside Hills. Rachel was nervous, glancing around constantly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "But I needed the job. I have student loans, rent." When I started asking questions, Mr. Harper got angry. He said I was making serious accusations without evidence, that I was jeopardizing my career. Then he fired me for performance issues. She slid a thumb drive across the table. "Everything I kept is on here. Client files, email exchanges, accounting irregularities. I didn't know who to trust at the company. Everyone loves Mr. Harper. He's so charming, so successful. But the numbers didn't lie. Agent Chin took the drive. This could be exactly what we need for conspiracy charges. You did the right thing coming forward. Rachel looked at me directly for the first time. You're his wife, aren't you? I've seen your picture in his office. I'm sorry. I know this must be horrible for you. Don't be sorry, I said. You told the truth. That takes courage. After Rachel left, Agent Chin turned to me. We're almost ready. The arrest is scheduled for next Thursday. It'll happen at the Belmont Country Club Charity Gala. Maximum visibility, multiple witnesses, no chance for him to destroy evidence or flee. Thursday was 6 days away. The annual Summit Financial Charity Gala, the biggest event of the year, where Brandon would be honored for his philanthropic contributions to Riverside Hills. He'd bought a new suit for it. He'd been practicing his acceptance speech. He'd told me I didn't need to attend if I found these events boring. I'll be there, I said. I want to see it happen. Agent Chin studied me carefully. Are you sure? It's going to be public, probably traumatic. His arrest will make headlines. Your life is about to change dramatically. My life already changed, I replied. I just want him to know I'm the one who changed it. Those final 6 days crawled by with excruciating slowness. I helped Lily with a school project on ocean ecosystems. I attended Sophie's soccer championship game. I listened to Ethan practice his debate arguments about environmental policy. I lived in these small, precious moments with my children, knowing that after Thursday, nothing would be the same. Brandon grew increasingly excited about the gala. He talked about the guest list, the silent auction, the award he'd be receiving. He even suggested I buy a new dress for the occasion, handing me his credit card with a magnanimous smile. Make yourself beautiful, he said. I want to show you off. I bought a dress, deep emerald green, elegant and professional. I'd wear it while watching his entire constructed world collapse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The morning of the gala, Brandon was cheerful at breakfast, talking about his plans for the day. He had a meeting with David Foster, then appointments with 2 major clients, then he'd come home to change before the event. Everything was perfectly normal, perfectly ordinary. Our last day as a family before the truth destroyed the illusion. After he left, I gathered the children together in our living room. I'd been dreading this conversation, rehearsing it in my mind for days. They sensed something serious, sitting close together on the couch, their faces reflecting concern. I need to talk to you about something important, I began. Your father and I are going to be separating. He's made some choices that mean we can't stay married. Ethan, at 14, understood more than the younger two. Is he having an affair? There was no point in lying. Yes. But it's more complicated than that. There are legal issues too. Things that might be in the news soon. I need you to know that I love you completely, and nothing that happens changes that. You didn't do anything wrong. This is about choices your father made. Lily started crying. Sophie sat frozen, processing. Ethan's jaw tightened in an expression that made him look suddenly older. They asked questions I answered as honestly as I could without revealing everything. When they finally went upstairs, each processing in their own way, I sat alone in the quiet house and allowed myself one moment of grief for the family we'd been, the life we'd had, the innocence that was about to be shattered. Then I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and began getting ready for the gala. Tonight, Brandon Harper would receive his recognition. And tonight, everyone would learn exactly what kind of man he really was. The Belmont Country Club glittered under the evening sky, its colonial facade lit with warm golden lights that reflected off the luxury vehicles filling the circular drive. Valets in crisp uniforms opened doors for guests in evening wear, women in flowing gowns and men in tailored tuxedos. I arrived alone, my emerald dress drawing admiring glances as I stepped out of my car and handed the keys to a young valet who didn't know he was about to witness history. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into an elegant space worthy of the event's prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over round tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece a tasteful arrangement of white roses and candles. A small orchestra played classical pieces in one corner while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The crowd represented Riverside Hill's elite, business leaders and philanthropists dressed in their finest, mingling and laughing with the ease of people accustomed to wealth. I spotted Brandon immediately. He stood near the stage with David Foster and several other Summit financial partners, his tuxedo perfectly fitted, his smile confident and warm. Vanessa was at his side, wearing a crimson dress that hugged her figure, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She'd positioned herself as his date openly, no longer hiding their relationship. The message was clear to anyone paying attention. Brandon had moved on, and he wanted everyone to know it. Several couples I'd known for years approached me with sympathetic expressions that made my skin crawl. "Nicole, we heard about the separation," murmured Catherine Wells, whose retirement fund Brandon had been managing for a decade. "I'm so sorry. Brandon seems to be handling it well though. He looks happy." "He does, doesn't he?" I replied with a smile that felt painted on. "I'm sure he's very pleased with how things have worked out." Catherine glanced toward Brandon and Vanessa, her expression disapproving. "It's tacky, bringing her here so soon. You'd think he'd have more discretion." "Some men don't see the need for discretion," I said. "They believe they're entitled to whatever they want." Across the room, I caught Agent Chen's eye. He was dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like another wealthy guest, blending seamlessly into the crowd. Two other agents I'd been introduced to earlier were positioned near the exits. Patricia stood near the bar, her sharp gaze tracking Brandon's movements. Everything was in place. We were simply waiting for the right moment. The cocktail hour stretched on with agonizing slowness. I accepted a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking and made small talk with people who would soon learn that their financial advisor had been systematically robbing them. The Hendersons asked about the children. The Martinez couple mentioned they were finally ready to retire thanks to Brandon's excellent management of their portfolio. Each conversation felt like a knife turning in my chest, knowing what these people were about to discover. Brandon finally noticed me across the room. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder to read. He excused himself from his group and approached me with Vanessa trailing slightly behind. His smile was tight, controlled. "Nicole, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought we agreed these events weren't really your thing anymore." "I changed my mind," I said pleasantly. "It seemed important to be here tonight. For old time's sake." Vanessa moved closer to Brandon, her body language territorial. She extended her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Vanessa Klein. I don't think we've officially met." I shook her hand, noting the expensive manicure, the designer dress, the jewelry that had probably been purchased with stolen money. "No, we haven't. Though I feel like I know you quite well. Brandon talks about his work associates constantly." The barb landed softly enough that Vanessa's smile faltered just slightly. Brandon's hand went to the small of her back, a gesture I'd seen him make with me thousands of times. It meant nothing now, just another performance in his endless repertoire. "Well, I should get back to our table," Brandon said. "The program starts soon. Enjoy your evening, Nicole." I watched them return to the head table, noting how Vanessa leaned into him, whispering something that made him laugh. They looked like a couple deeply in love, completely at ease, celebrating their future together. They had no idea that future was about to evaporate. Dinner was served with the kind of precision that came from years of hosting elegant events. I sat at a table near the back with several other single attendees, people I knew casually from various charity functions over the years. They made polite conversation about their businesses, their families, the upcoming summer vacation season. I participated mechanically, my attention focused on the head table where Brandon sat like a king holding court. The program began after dessert. The president of Belmont Country Club took the stage to welcome everyone and outline the evening's agenda. There would be recognition of several major donors, a presentation about the charitable causes Summit Financial supported, and finally the presentation of the Philanthropist of the Year award to Brandon Harper for his outstanding contributions to the Riverside Hills community. David Foster spoke first, delivering a glowing tribute to his business partner. He talked about Brandon's vision for Summit Financial, his dedication to clients, his innovative investment strategies that had grown the firm into one of the region's most respected financial institutions. He mentioned Brandon's commitment to giving back, his work with local charities, his support of education and healthcare initiatives. Every word was a lie built on stolen money, and David had no idea. A video montage played next, showing Brandon at various charitable events over the years. There he was at the Children's Hospital groundbreaking, writing a large check. There he was at the Literacy Foundation Gala, accepting thanks from grateful organizers. There he was at youth sports programs, mentoring disadvantaged kids. The audience applauded, moved by the narrative of a successful man using his wealth and influence to improve his community. I watched Brandon's face as the video played. He was smiling, nodding at appropriate moments, accepting congratulations from those nearby. Vanessa squeezed his hand. He looked like a man whose carefully constructed image was being celebrated exactly as planned. He looked like someone who'd gotten away with everything. The video ended and the club president returned to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me tremendous pleasure to present this year's Philanthropist of the Year award to Brandon Harper. Brandon, please join me. The applause was thunderous as Brandon stood and made his way to the stage. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, who believed his charm and intelligence would always protect him. He shook hands with the president, accepted the crystal trophy, and approached the microphone with a humble smile that had taken years to perfect. "Thank you all so much," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "This honor means more to me than I can express. When I started Summit Financial 15 years ago, my goal wasn't just to build a successful business. It was to create something that would make a real difference in our community." He paused for effect, scanning the audience with apparent emotion. "The success we've achieved belongs to everyone in this room. To our clients who trusted us with their dreams and their futures. To my partners who share my vision of ethical, client-centered service. To this community that welcomed us and supported our growth." I felt physically ill listening to him talk about ethics and trust while Vanessa beamed at him from the head table. Agent Chen caught my eye and gave a slight nod. It was almost time. Brandon continued his speech, hitting all the expected notes. He thanked David and the other partners. He mentioned specific charitable initiatives Summit Financial had supported. He talked about the responsibility that came with financial success and the obligation to give back to those less fortunate. Every word was beautifully delivered, perfectly calibrated to reinforce the image of Brandon Harper as a pillar of the community. And finally, he said, his voice dropping to something more intimate, "I want to acknowledge that personal success is meaningless without people to share it with. My children, who inspire me every day to be better. And someone special who's shown me that it's never too late to choose happiness." His gaze went to Vanessa, and the audience made soft sounds of approval. Several people glanced at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. I kept my face neutral, waiting. Brandon raised his crystal trophy slightly. "This award represents everything Summit Financial stands for. Integrity, dedication, and a commitment to putting our clients first. I promise to continue earning your trust every single day." The applause began again as he stepped away from the microphone. That's when Agent Chen moved forward, two other federal agents flanking him. They approached the stage with badges clearly visible, their expressions professional and implacable. The applause died away as people realized something was happening, something that wasn't part of the program. "Brandon Harper," Agent Chen's voice carried clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. "I'm Agent Morris Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The gasps from the audience were audible. Brandon's face went white, then red, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally panic. He took a step backward as if he could somehow escape, but the other agents were already moving onto the stage. "This is insane," Brandon sputtered. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," Agent Chen said calmly. "We have extensive documentation of your activities over the past 4 years. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." I stood from my table and moved closer, wanting Brandon to see me, to understand. David Foster was on his feet, his face a mask of confusion. You can't just arrest him in the middle of an event. What evidence do you have? Agent Chen turned to address the room, his voice carrying authority. Summit Financial Group has been under federal investigation for 8 months. We have evidence that Mr. Harper has systematically embezzled over $6 million from client accounts, created shell companies to launder the funds, and planned to flee the country with the stolen money. The room erupted in chaos. People shouted questions, pulled out phones, pushed toward the stage. The other Summit partners looked stunned. Clients whose money Brandon had been managing stood frozen, processing what they'd just heard. Vanessa remained at the head table, her face drained of color, her carefully constructed evening collapsing around her. Brandon's eyes found mine in the crowd. The moment our gazes met, I saw understanding dawn. He knew. He knew I was responsible for this, that I'd been the one gathering evidence, coordinating with investigators, building the case that had brought federal agents to his moment of triumph. You, he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Nicole, what did you do? I walked closer to the stage, my voice steady and clear. I found out the truth. About the money, about Vanessa, about your plan to disappear to Costa Rica. I documented everything and gave it to the authorities. You were never going to get away with this, Brandon. His expression transformed into something ugly, all pretense of charm evaporating. You vindictive woman. You've destroyed everything out of spite because I wanted a divorce. Agent Chen interrupted, efficiently handcuffing Brandon while reading him his Miranda rights. The crystal trophy lay forgotten on the stage, its engraved praise of Brandon's integrity a bitter irony. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Patricia appeared at my side, her hand briefly touching my elbow in support. David Foster pushed through the crowd toward us, his face flushed with anger and confusion. Is this true? Has Brandon been stealing from our clients? Patricia handed him a business card. You'll want to contact your own attorney immediately. Summit Financial is about to face extensive scrutiny. I suggest you cooperate fully with the investigation if you want to avoid being charged as an accessory. I didn't know anything about this, David protested, but his voice shook with uncertainty. We're partners. We built this company together. Then you weren't paying attention, Patricia said coolly. The evidence is substantial and well documented. Mr. Harper has been operating a criminal enterprise under the guise of legitimate business for years. As the agents led Brandon toward the exit, he tried one more time to catch my eye. The children, he said desperately. Nicole, think about what this does to the children. I thought about them constantly, I replied. That's why I exposed you. They deserve to know the truth about who their father really is, not live their lives built on his lies. The ballroom had descended into complete chaos. People surrounded the remaining Summit partners, demanding answers. Others were on phones, presumably calling lawyers or checking on their accounts. The elegant charity gala had transformed into a crime scene, with federal agents securing the venue and taking statements. Vanessa tried to leave through a side exit but was stopped by another agent. Ms. Klein, we have questions about your involvement in Mr. Harper's activities. You'll need to come with us for questioning. I don't know anything, Vanessa protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Brandon handled everything. I just helped him with some real estate transactions. The Costa Rica property, Agent Chen said. The Cascade Investment Holdings accounts. The offshore transfers. You're listed as a co-owner on multiple assets purchased with stolen funds. That makes you an accessory to money laundering at minimum. As they led her away, Vanessa's gaze found mine. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, two women who'd both been deceived by Brandon Harper in different ways. But where I'd been his wife, the mother of his children, building a life I believed was real, she'd been his accomplice, helping him steal and planning to run with him. Whatever sympathy I might have felt evaporated. The next hours passed in a blur of official statements and legal procedures. I gave a formal statement to the federal agents, outlining how I'd discovered the evidence and what I'd found. Patricia coordinated with the district attorney's office on the divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. By midnight, Brandon was in federal custody facing charges that could result in decades in prison. I drove home through empty streets, my emerald dress feeling like a costume from someone else's life. The house was dark when I arrived. Margaret had stayed with the children, and I found her waiting in the kitchen with tea and worried eyes. "It's done," I told her, sinking into a chair. "He's been arrested. It's going to be all over the news tomorrow." "How are you?" Margaret asked gently. I didn't know how to answer. I felt exhausted, wrung out, but also strangely lighter. The weight of deception, of pretending, of living Brandon's lies, had lifted. What remained was complicated and painful, but it was real. "Ask me again in a few months," I finally said. "Right now, I'm just trying to breathe." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were incredibly brave tonight. You stood up for yourself and for all those families he stole from. That took real courage." "It didn't feel like courage," I admitted. "It felt like survival. Like if I didn't fight back, I'd disappear completely into the role of Brandon's wife and never find myself again." Upstairs, I checked on the children. They were all asleep, blissfully unaware that their father had been arrested at a charity gala while accepting an award for philanthropy. Tomorrow they'd wake to news crews outside our house, to their father's face on television, to their world fundamentally changed. But tonight they slept peacefully, and I stood in each of their doorways watching them breathe, gathering strength for the battles ahead. In my bedroom, I removed the emerald dress and hung it carefully in the closet. I'd never wear it again, but I'd keep it as a reminder of the night I'd stood in a ballroom full of Riverside Hills elite and watched justice finally catch up to the man who'd thought himself untouchable. The night I'd transformed from the compliant wife who organized charity events and baked cookies into someone who could look her husband in the eye while federal agents handcuffed him. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from people who'd been at the gala, from reporters requesting comments, from friends and acquaintances processing the news. I turned it off and let the silence settle around me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Media attention, legal proceedings, the complicated work of helping my children understand and process their father's crimes. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Pure, simple, overwhelming relief that the lies had finally ended and the truth, however painful, was finally known. Morning arrived with the harsh glare of camera flashes through our front windows. News vans lined Maple Ridge Drive, reporters positioned on our lawn with microphones ready, neighbors standing in clusters watching the spectacle unfold. I closed the curtains and herded the children away from the windows, trying to create a buffer between them and the chaos that had invaded our quiet street. Ethan had already seen the headlines on his phone before I could prepare him. His face was pale as he showed me the screen. Prominent investment manager arrested for massive fraud. The article included Brandon's photo from last night, handcuffed and being led away by federal agents, his expression a mixture of shock and rage. Beneath it was a family photo from 2 years ago, all 5 of us smiling at a charity event, the picture of suburban success. "Is it true?" Ethan asked quietly. "Did Dad really steal millions of dollars?" I sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for him to join me. Sophie and Lily appeared in the doorway, drawn by the serious tone of our voices. I'd hoped to have more time to prepare for this conversation, to find the right words to explain the unexplainable, but the news cycle had made that impossible. "Yes," I said simply. "Your father has been stealing money from his clients for several years. He created fake companies and hid the money in secret accounts. The police have proof, and that's why he was arrested last night." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But why would he do that? We have enough money. We have a nice house and we go on vacations and we don't need more." "It wasn't about need," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "Your father made choices that were wrong. He wanted things that the stolen money could buy, and he convinced himself that he deserved it, that he was smart enough not to get caught." Lily climbed into my lap, something she hadn't done in months, regressing into the comfort of childhood in the face of incomprehensible adult failures. Is Daddy going to jail? Probably, I admitted, wrapping my arms around her. He did something very serious, and there are consequences for that. I know this is scary and confusing. You're allowed to feel however you feel about it. Angry, sad, confused, all of it is okay. Are we going to be poor now? Sophie asked. Will we have to move? Will kids at school make fun of us? The practical questions were easier to answer than the emotional ones. We'll be okay financially. The house is in my name too, so we won't lose it. We might need to make some changes, but we're not going to be poor. As for school, I paused, knowing this would be one of the hardest parts. Some people might say unkind things. People don't always know how to handle situations like this. But your father's choices don't define who you are. Ethan's jaw was tight with anger. Everyone's going to know. It's going to be everywhere. How am I supposed to go to debate practice when everyone's seen Dad being arrested on TV? You don't have to go anywhere you're not ready to go, I said. We can take some time off from activities, stay home for a few days while things settle down. Margaret's going to stay with us for a while to help. I want to see Dad, Lily said suddenly. Can we visit him? The question stabbed through me. Eventually, yes. But right now he's with the police, answering questions and dealing with lawyers. When he's ready for visitors, we'll talk about it. The doorbell rang repeatedly throughout the morning, reporters hoping for a statement, neighbors offering support or seeking gossip disguised as concern. I ignored them all, focusing on creating a sense of normalcy inside our home while outside, our private tragedy became public entertainment. Patricia called mid-morning with updates. Brandon had been formally charged with 12 counts including wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. His bail hearing was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The judge would likely set it high given the flight risk, especially with the evidence of his planned escape to Costa Rica. What about Vanessa? I asked, stepping into the laundry room for privacy. She's been charged as an accessory. She's claiming ignorance, saying Brandon told her the money was legitimate profits from his business. Her attorney is already trying to negotiate a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Brandon. Will she take it? Patricia's tone was knowing. She'd be foolish not to. Her involvement is documented extensively. If she cooperates, she might avoid significant prison time. If she doesn't, she's looking at years alongside Brandon. The divorce papers were filed this morning, Patricia continued. Given the criminal charges and the evidence of his affair, we're requesting full custody with supervised visitation once he's released on bail. We're also freezing all joint assets until we can determine what's legitimately yours versus what was purchased with stolen funds. The house, I said. The kids are worried about the house. The house was purchased before the embezzlement began, and it's in both your names. You're safe there. But Brandon's car, his watch collection, some of the artwork, those might be seized as part of asset forfeiture. The government will want to recover as much as possible to compensate his victims. His victims. The phrase hung in the air, a reminder that this wasn't just about our family's private pain. Dozens of families had trusted Brandon with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their financial futures. While we'd lived in comfortable ignorance, they'd been systematically robbed. I need to contact them, I said suddenly. The clients. I need to apologize. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Nicole, you didn't do anything wrong. You're a victim here too. But I was his wife. I lived in the house his stolen money helped maintain. I attended events where he was celebrated for success built on fraud. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. You're not responsible for his choices, Patricia said firmly. But if you want to make a statement, we can craft something appropriate. Just nothing that could be construed as admitting liability or accepting responsibility for his crimes. After we hung up, I found myself in Brandon's office, standing in the space where I'd first discovered the hidden accounts that started this cascade. The room looked the same, his desk neat, his books arranged precisely on shelves, his diplomas and awards hung in perfect alignment. But now I saw it differently, not as the workspace of a successful businessman but as the command center of a criminal operation. Agent Chen had arranged to meet me that afternoon to go through additional evidence they discovered during their search of Brandon's files. Margaret arrived to stay with the children, bringing groceries and a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask her concern. She pulled me into a tight hug in the kitchen. "You look exhausted," she said bluntly. "When's the last time you really slept?" "I don't remember," I admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Brandon's face when they arrested him. Or I think about all those families whose money he stole. Or I worry about the kids and how they're going to get through this. The kids are resilient. They have you, and that's what matters." Margaret squeezed my shoulders. "But you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." The meeting with Agent Chen took place at Patricia's office, away from the media circus surrounding our house. He brought boxes of documents, printouts of email exchanges, and a forensic accountant named Dr. Sarah Winters who'd been analyzing Brandon's financial web for weeks. "Mrs. Harper," Dr. Winters began, spreading papers across Patricia's conference table. "What your husband created was sophisticated. Multiple layers of shell companies, offshore accounts in 3 different countries, property holdings registered under various business names. He was moving money in patterns designed to avoid detection, keeping individual transactions below reporting thresholds, spacing out transfers to look like legitimate business activity." She showed me charts tracking money flow from Summit Financial client accounts into Brandon's shell companies, then out to personal purchases, investments, and the offshore accounts where he'd been stockpiling funds for his planned escape. The complexity was staggering, years of careful planning and execution. "How much did he actually take?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Based on what we've traced so far," Dr. Winters said, "approximately $6.3 million from client accounts. Another $800,000 from Summit Financial's operating funds, disguised as business expenses. And he'd been systematically inflating management fees, skimming an additional $200,000 over the past 4 years." I felt sick. Nearly $7.5 million. How many people were affected? Agent Chen consulted his notes. 42 client accounts were compromised. Some lost their entire retirement savings. Others had college funds depleted. A few had investment portfolios that appeared healthy on their statements but were actually worth a fraction of what they believed. "The Henderson family," I said suddenly, remembering their daughter who wanted to be a doctor. "How much did they lose?" Agent Chen's expression was grim. "Their entire college fund. $370,000 they'd been saving for 18 years. As of 3 months ago, according to their statements, they had $412,000. In reality, they had $42,000 left." The number hit me like a physical blow. That girl's medical school dreams, gone because Brandon wanted to fund a secret life with his mistress. I pressed my hands against the table to steady myself. What happens to them now? Can they recover any of it? That depends on asset forfeiture, Agent Chen explained. We'll seize everything we can prove was purchased with stolen funds. Brandon's properties, his investments, even personal items of significant value. That money will go into a victim compensation fund. But realistically, they'll probably recover 30 to 50 cents on the dollar at best. It's not enough, I said. It'll never be enough to fix what he destroyed. No, Agent Chen agreed. It won't. But it's more than they'd have if you hadn't come forward. Your evidence made this case possible. Without it, Brandon might have succeeded in disappearing with all that money, and these families would have spent years wondering what happened to their savings. The rest of the meeting covered the timeline for the criminal trial, the likelihood of additional charges as they uncovered more evidence, and the process for the divorce proceedings running parallel to the criminal case. By the time I left Patricia's office, it was early evening, and my head throbbed with information overload. I drove past Summit Financial's office building on my way home. Police tape still marked the entrance from yesterday's search, and I could see lights on inside where investigators were presumably still going through files. The sign out front, elegant brass letters spelling out Summit Financial Group, seemed like a monument to a lie. Tomorrow it would be gone, the company dissolved, its assets seized, its reputation destroyed beyond repair. At home, I found the children watching a movie with Margaret, seeking escape in familiar entertainment. They'd changed into comfortable clothes, created a nest of blankets and pillows in the living room, and were determinedly trying to have a normal evening. I joined them, settling onto the couch next to Sophie, who immediately curled against my side. We ordered pizza, breaking our usual healthy dinner rules because nothing about this situation was usual. While we ate, Ethan's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from friends. He finally silenced it, his expression troubled. "Everyone wants to know what's happening," he said. "Half of them are being supportive, but some are saying really harsh things. Tyler's dad had money with Summit Financial. Tyler says his family might lose their house." I set down my pizza, appetite gone. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. This isn't fair to you or your friends. Their anger is understandable, even if it's misdirected. Your father's choices hurt a lot of people." "Tyler's been my best friend since 3rd grade, Ethan said quietly. "What if he hates me now?" "Then he's not really your friend," Margaret interjected gently. "Real friends understand that you're not responsible for your parents' actions. Give people time to process their feelings. The ones who matter will remember who you are." That night, after the children finally fell asleep, I sat in the darkened living room with Margaret and let the tears come. Silent, exhausted tears for the marriage that had never been what I thought, for the childhood innocence my children had lost, for the families whose lives Brandon had devastated in his pursuit of wealth and excitement. Margaret didn't offer platitudes or try to make it better. She simply sat beside me, her presence a steady anchor while I cried for everything that had been broken and everything that could never be fixed. When the tears finally stopped, she made tea and we sat in companionable silence, watching the night deepen outside our windows. The bail hearing the next day was a media circus. Reporters packed the courthouse hallway, cameras tracking every arrival and departure. I attended with Patricia, sitting in the back of the courtroom where I could observe without being in Brandon's direct line of sight. He appeared in an orange jumpsuit, his usual polish stripped away, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. His attorney argued for reasonable bail, pointing to Brandon's ties to the community, his lack of criminal history, his 3 children who needed their father. The prosecutor countered with evidence of his planned flight to Costa Rica, the offshore accounts, the fake passport they discovered during their search of his properties. The flight risk was substantial, the crime severe, the evidence overwhelming. He brought boxes of documents, printouts of email exchanges, and a forensic accountant named Dr. Sarah Winters who'd been analyzing Brandon's financial web for weeks. "Mrs. Harper," Dr. Winters began, spreading papers across Patricia's conference table. "What your husband created was sophisticated. Multiple layers of shell companies, offshore accounts in 3 different countries, property holdings registered under various business names. He was moving money in patterns designed to avoid detection, keeping individual transactions below reporting thresholds, spacing out transfers to look like legitimate business activity." She showed me charts tracking money flow from Summit Financial client accounts into Brandon's shell companies, then out to personal purchases, investments, and the offshore accounts where he'd been stockpiling funds for his planned escape. The complexity was staggering, years of careful planning and execution. "How much did he actually take?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Based on what we've traced so far," Dr. Winters said, "approximately $6.3 million from client accounts. Another $800,000 from Summit Financial's operating funds, disguised as business expenses. And he'd been systematically inflating management fees, skimming an additional $200,000 over the past 4 years." I felt sick. Nearly $7.5 million. How many people were affected? Agent Chin consulted his notes. 42 client accounts were compromised. Some lost their entire retirement savings. Others had college funds depleted. A few had investment portfolios that appeared healthy on their statements but were actually worth a fraction of what they believed. "The Henderson family," I said suddenly, remembering their daughter who wanted to be a doctor. "How much did they lose?" Agent Chen's expression was grim. Their entire college fund. $370,000 they'd been saving for 18 years. As of 3 months ago, according to their statements, they had $412,000. In reality, they had $42,000 left. The number hit me like a physical blow. That girl's medical school dreams, gone because Brandon wanted to fund a secret life with his mistress. I pressed my hands against the table to steady myself. What happens to them now? Can they recover any of it? That depends on asset forfeiture, Agent Chen explained. We'll seize everything we can prove was purchased with stolen funds. Brandon's properties, his investments, even personal items of significant value. That money will go into a victim compensation fund. But realistically, they'll probably recover 30 to 50 cents on the dollar at best. It's not enough, I said. It'll never be enough to fix what he destroyed. No, Agent Chen agreed. It won't. But it's more than they'd have if you hadn't come forward. Your evidence made this case possible. Without it, Brandon might have succeeded in disappearing with all that money, and these families would have spent years wondering what happened to their savings. The rest of the meeting covered the timeline for the criminal trial, the likelihood of additional charges as they uncovered more evidence, and the process for the divorce proceedings running parallel to the criminal case. By the time I left Patricia's office, it was early evening, and my head throbbed with information overload. I drove past Summit Financial's office building on my way home. Police tape still marked the entrance from yesterday's search, and I could see lights on inside where investigators were presumably still going through files. The sign out front, elegant brass letters spelling out Summit Financial Group, seemed like a monument to a lie. Tomorrow it would be gone, the company dissolved, its assets seized, its reputation destroyed beyond repair. At home, I found the children watching a movie with Margaret, seeking escape in familiar entertainment. They'd changed into comfortable clothes, created a nest of blankets and pillows in the living room, and were determinedly trying to have a normal evening. I joined them, settling onto the couch next to Sophie, who immediately curled against my side. We ordered pizza, breaking our usual healthy dinner rules because nothing about this situation was usual. While we ate, Ethan's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from friends. He finally silenced it, his expression troubled. Everyone wants to know what's happening, he said. Half of them are being supportive, but some are saying really harsh things. Tyler's dad had money with Summit Financial. Tyler says his family might lose their house. I set down my pizza, appetite gone. I'm so sorry, Ethan. This isn't fair to you or your friends. Their anger is understandable, even if it's misdirected. Your father's choices hurt a lot of people. Tyler's been my best friend since 3rd grade, Ethan said quietly. What if he hates me now? Then he's not really your friend, Margaret interjected gently. Real friends understand that you're not responsible for your parents' actions. Give people time to process their feelings. The ones who matter will remember who you are. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, I sat in the darkened living room with Margaret and let the tears come. Silent, exhausted tears for the marriage that had never been what I thought, for the childhood innocence my children had lost, for the families whose lives Brandon had devastated in his pursuit of wealth and excitement. Margaret didn't offer platitudes or try to make it better. She simply sat beside me, her presence a steady anchor while I cried for everything that had been broken and everything that could never be fixed. When the tears finally stopped, she made tea and we sat in companionable silence, watching the night deepen outside our windows. The bail hearing the next day was a media circus. Reporters packed the courthouse hallway, cameras tracking every arrival and departure. I attended with Patricia, sitting in the back of the courtroom where I could observe without being in Brandon's direct line of sight. He appeared in an orange jumpsuit, his usual polish stripped away, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. His attorney argued for reasonable bail, pointing to Brandon's ties to the community, his lack of criminal history, his 3 children who needed their father. The prosecutor countered with evidence of his planned flight to Costa Rica, the offshore accounts, the fake passport they discovered during their search of his properties. The flight risk was substantial, the crime severe, the evidence overwhelming. The judge set bail at $5 million, requiring 10% cash and surrender of all passports. Brandon's face went white at the amount. Even liquidating everything he could legally access, he'd struggle to meet it. His attorney immediately requested a reduction, but the judge was unmoved. Given the defendant's demonstrated intent to flee the jurisdiction with substantial stolen assets, I find this amount appropriate to ensure his appearance at trial. As they led Brandon away, his eyes found mine in the courtroom. For a moment, the careful mask slipped, and I saw something raw and desperate. Then he turned away, shoulders slumped, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his delusions of invincibility. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Patricia had prepared a brief statement which I delivered from the courthouse steps, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. I'm deeply sorry for the pain my husband's actions have caused to his clients and their families. I knew nothing about his crimes until recently, and I immediately contacted authorities when I discovered evidence of his illegal activities. My focus now is on protecting my children and cooperating fully with investigators to ensure justice is served and victims are compensated to the greatest extent possible. I won't be taking questions at this time. The cameras flashed as I descended the steps, Patricia's hand on my elbow guiding me through the crowd. We climbed into her car and drove away while reporters shouted after us, desperate for more details, more drama, more emotion to feed the story that had captured regional and even national attention. That evening, sitting at our kitchen table with financial documents spread before me, I began the work of rebuilding. Patricia had arranged meetings with a financial advisor who specialized in post-fraud situations, with a therapist who worked with families affected by parental crimes, with support groups for people navigating similar situations. The path forward was mapped out in meetings and appointments and legal proceedings, each step designed to move us from victims to survivors. Lily wandered in as I worked, her stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" I pulled her onto my lap, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Yes, sweetheart. It's going to be hard for a while, and sad sometimes, but we're going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters most. Will Daddy be okay too?" The question deserved honesty. Daddy made choices that have consequences. He's going to have to face those consequences, and that will be hard for him. But that's not your responsibility to fix. Your job is just to be a kid and let the grown-ups handle the grown-up problems. She nodded against my shoulder, not fully understanding but trusting that I would keep her safe. As I held her, I realized that despite everything Brandon had destroyed, he hadn't destroyed us. We were still here, still whole in the ways that mattered, still capable of building something real from the wreckage of his lies. The sun was setting through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the financial documents and legal papers that had become my new normal. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more revelations, more painful steps on the long road toward justice and healing. But tonight, with my daughter in my arms and my other children safe upstairs, I allowed myself to believe what I'd told Lily. We were going to be okay. Not today, maybe not even soon, but eventually. And that fragile belief, that tiny seed of hope, was enough to keep moving forward. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom for the final time as Brandon Harper's wife. The divorce had been finalized the week before, dissolving 18 years of marriage in a stack of legal documents that reduced our shared history to asset divisions and custody arrangements. Today was his sentencing hearing, the culmination of a trial that had laid bare every detail of his crimes for public consumption. Brandon had taken a plea deal after 3 weeks of damning testimony. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of dying in prison, he'd agreed to plead guilty to 8 felony counts in exchange for a recommended sentence of 15 years. The judge wasn't bound by the recommendation, but it gave him a framework for determining Brandon's fate. The courtroom was packed with his victims. The Henderson family sat in the front row, their daughter having deferred medical school indefinitely while they rebuilt their finances. The Martinez couple, whose retirement had been gutted, held hands with the quiet dignity of people who'd worked their entire lives only to have security stolen in their final years. 42 families represented, each one carrying the weight of Brandon's betrayal. Brandon's attorney made a final plea for leniency, speaking of his client's remorse, his cooperation with investigators, his desire to make amends. He mentioned the 3 children who would grow up without their father, the community contributions Brandon had made before his fall. The words rang hollow in the face of the devastation those 42 families had endured. The prosecutor countered with the systematic nature of Brandon's crimes, the years of calculated deception, the callousness of stealing from families who trusted him with their futures. She read excerpts from victim impact statements, voices of people whose lives had been irreparably damaged by one man's greed and arrogance. Then the judge asked if Brandon wished to address the court. He stood slowly, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits he'd once worn with such pride. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, stripped of its former confidence. I have no excuses for what I did. I betrayed people who trusted me, destroyed families who depended on me, and hurt my own children in ways I'll never be able to repair. I was arrogant, selfish, and convinced myself I was entitled to take what wasn't mine. Every day I'll live with the knowledge of the pain I caused. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have left to offer. The judge's expression remained impassive as Brandon sat down. She spent several minutes reviewing documents before addressing the courtroom. Her voice carried the weight of authority as she outlined the scope of Brandon's crimes, the methodical planning that went into his scheme, the lives devastated by his actions. Mr. Harper, you held a position of trust and abused it systematically for years. You stole not just money, but security, dreams, and futures from dozens of families. Your crimes were not impulsive or accidental. They were calculated, deliberate, and sustained over an extended period. The sentence must reflect both the severity of your actions and serve as a deterrent to others who might consider similar betrayals of trust. She sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison, 3 years more than the plea deal recommendation, with restitution to be paid from any assets recovered through forfeiture proceedings. Brandon's face crumpled as the reality settled over him. 18 years meant he'd be 60 when released, his children grown, his former life completely erased. As they led him away, Brandon looked back at the courtroom one final time. His eyes found mine, and in that moment I saw not the confident man I'd married or the criminal who'd stolen millions, but simply someone who'd lost everything through his own choices. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no lingering affection. Just a quiet emptiness where 18 years of my life used to be. Outside the courthouse, several victims approached me. The Henderson's daughter shook my hand, her grip firm despite her tears. Thank you for coming forward. Without your evidence, he might have gotten away with all of it. We still lost so much, but at least there's justice. Others echoed similar sentiments, their gratitude mixed with grief for what they'd lost. I accepted their words with humility, knowing that my actions couldn't restore what Brandon had taken, could only ensure he faced consequences for stealing it. Patricia drove me home through autumn streets lined with gold and crimson leaves. The media attention had finally begun to fade, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. Our lives were slowly returning to something resembling normal, though normal looked very different than it had a year ago. The children had started therapy, processing their complicated feelings about their father in safe spaces with professionals trained to help. Ethan had rejoined debate team after a supportive coach made it clear that his father's crimes didn't define him. Sophie had thrown herself into soccer with renewed intensity, channeling confusion into physical achievement. Lily still asked difficult questions, but the nightmares had stopped, and her paintings had regained their previous brightness. I'd accepted a full-time position at Riverside Community Foundation, stepping into a senior management role that utilized my financial background and organizational skills. The work was meaningful, helping channel donations to worthy causes, everything my marriage to Brandon hadn't been. My colleagues knew my story but judged me on my abilities, offering respect I'd earned rather than reflected from someone else's success. Margaret had helped me redecorate the house, removing traces of Brandon and the life we'd shared. New paint colors, different furniture arrangements, photographs that featured only the children and me. The house was becoming ours, not his, a space where we could heal and grow without constant reminders of betrayal. That evening, I gathered the children in our renovated living room. The sentencing had been on the news, and they deserved to hear about it from me first. I explained the sentence, what it meant, when they might see their father again. They processed it differently based on their ages and understanding, but all of them seemed to find some closure in knowing the legal proceedings were finally finished. "We're going to be okay," I told them, the same words I'd been repeating for months. "It's been hard, and it'll still be hard sometimes, but we're stronger than we knew. We have each other, and that's what really matters." Looking at their faces, I saw resilience beginning to replace confusion, strength emerging from pain. We were building something new from the ruins of what Brandon had destroyed. Something honest and real and entirely our own. The woman who discovered lipstick-stained bank statements and hidden accounts felt like a different person, someone from another life. The woman I'd become was harder, wiser, but also more authentically herself than she'd been in years. Brandon had stolen money, time, trust, and innocence. But he hadn't stolen our future. That belonged to us now, and we'd build it on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of illusion. The perfect life I'd thought we had was gone, but what remained was real, and real was infinitely more valuable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.